Hello dear viewers, my name is Ferdinand Nouri and I'm a migration consultant in Germany. As you know, I have already explained for you about the Refugee Protection, which in German it is called Flüchtlingseigenschaft or Flüchtlingsanerkennung, in a different video in this YouTube channel with its details. Today, I would like to explain for you about the family reunification with the refugee protection in Germany with all its details. For example, if you have married before fleeing your country of origin and coming to Germany, what are the requirements for a family reunification with this type of a protection? If you have married after fleeing your country of origin and coming to Germany, what are the requirements for a family reunification with this type of a protection, and so on. But first of all, I would like to briefly explain for you something about the refugee protection. After you apply for an asylum at the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees of Germany, if you get a refugee protection, which in German it is called Flüchtlingseigenschaft, Flüchtlingsanerkennung, or Flüchtlingsschutz from this office, in the decision sent to you by this office, it will be written that die Flüchtlingseigenschaft wird zuerkannt, which in English means the refugee status is granted, or the refugee protection is granted. This type of a protection is granted to the asylum seekers based on the Geneva Refugee Convention of 1951, which is a United Nations multilateral treaty that defines who a refugee is and sets out the rights of individuals who are granted a refugee protection and the responsibilities of nations that grant a refugee protection. Because the refugee protection is granted to the asylum seekers based on this international treaty, this type of a protection is also called an international protection. After you receive this type of a protection from the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees of Germany, you should refer to your respective foreigners office, which in German it is called Ausländerbehörde, and take this decision of the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees with you and apply for a residence permit based on Section 25, Subsection 2, Sentence 1, first alternative of the German Residence Act. This residence permit is usually valid for 3 years. At the same time, you can apply for the Blue Passport of Geneva Convention, which will also be valid for 3 years. For more information about the fact that how you can get this residence permit and the Blue Passport of Geneva Convention with this type of protection, you can watch my other videos about these topics in this YouTube channel. In fact, you can bring your spouse and your unmarried minor children with this type of protection under easier conditions through a family reunification to Germany. Similarly, minor children in Germany who get this type of protection can also bring their parents through a family reunification under easier conditions to Germany. As far as the family reunification of your spouse and your unmarried minor children is concerned, it is very important to know whether you have married before fleeing your country of origin or after fleeing your country of origin. If you have married before fleeing your country of origin, you can bring your spouse and your unmarried minor children under very easy conditions through a family reunification to Germany. In this video, first I will explain for you how you can bring your spouse and your unmarried minor children in case you have married before fleeing your country of origin through a family reunification. And after that, I'll explain for you how you can bring your spouse and your unmarried minor children through a family reunification to Germany in case you have married after fleeing your country of origin and after coming to Germany. In fact, if you have married before fleeing your country of origin, you are not required to have an employment and ensure your living expenses, or to have an apartment big enough for you and your spouse and your children in Germany, so that you can bring your spouse and your children through a family reunification to Germany. Your spouse is also not required to learn German language at A1 or A1 level, so that she can get a German national visa for a family reunification and come to Germany. However, you, your spouse, and your unmarried minor children must complete some of the general requirements for a family reunification, such as you and your spouse must have completed the 18 years of age. You and your spouse and your unmarried minor children must have a passport and an ID card. You should have a marriage certificate or a nikah according to Sharia law, and a marriage registration certificate, and so on. In order to be able to bring your spouse and your unmarried minor children through a family reunification under easier conditions, you should consider and put the following instructions into practice. If you have married before fleeing your country of origin, when you get this type of a protection from the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees of Germany, you must inform your respective foreigner's office through a preliminary application in written form, which in German is called fristwahrende Anzeige, about your intention of bringing your spouse and your unmarried minor children to Germany. In this preliminary application, you must write your complete name, your date of birth, and the type of the residence permit you have got based on your refugee protection in Germany. You must also write the complete names, dates of birth, passport numbers of your spouse and your children, and do not forget to also write the reason for bringing your spouse and your unmarried minor children, which is the family reunification and joining you in Germany. When you submit this preliminary application to your respective foreigner's office, you should get a confirmation from this office for this application. The German Embassy or the General Consulate of Germany expects from your spouse and your unmarried minor children in their appointment in this embassy or general consulate, among the other necessary documents, the confirmation of this preliminary application, and they must have it with themselves. You can also do this preliminary application or fristwahrende Anzeige online in the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany, which in German it's called Auswärtiges Amt. As you can see in this picture, you can go to this website and fill in the form about yourself, your spouse, and your children, and after filling it in, you should keep a copy of it in PDF form with you and send one to your spouse. And you should print a copy of it, keep this copy with you, and send one copy to your spouse. Because, as mentioned before, the German Embassy or the General Consulate of Germany will ask for this copy among the other documents during the interview of your spouse and children in this embassy or general consulate. If a migration counseling office in your city or region, your responsible social worker in your camp, or your lawyer helps you with writing the preliminary application for the foreigner's office, or with filling the online form in the website of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany, it is much better, because they mostly have experience in doing this for the other applicants. The services provided by the migration counseling offices in this regard and in many other cases are free of charge. It is worth mentioning that the minor children who have got this type of protection in Germany and want to bring their parents to this country through a family reunification do not need to submit such a preliminary application or fristwahrende Anzeige. After submitting this preliminary application about your spouse and your children, you should try to register your spouse and your children in the website of German Embassy or German General Consulate in their respective country for an appointment with their full names, dates of birth, and passport numbers. You must also give an email address so that they can send the confirmation for this registration in this email address, and later they can also send the appointment for the interview of your spouse and your children in the embassy or General Consulate of Germany in the same email address. On the other hand, those who have married after fleeing their country of origin and who have got this type of protection in Germany cannot bring their spouse and unmarried minor children based on the requirements I just mentioned for you. In addition, those who have married before fleeing their country of origin and who have got this type of protection in Germany but have not submitted a preliminary application, or their spouse and children have not given the application for a family reunification during the first 3 months after they have got their refugee protection, cannot bring their spouse and their unmarried minor children based on the requirements I just mentioned for you. In this case, they and their family members must complete all the general requirements for a family reunification. These general requirements are as below. First, you and your spouse must be at least 18 years old. Second, you and your spouse must have a passport and an ID card. Third, you must have a proof of marriage with your spouse. This can be a marriage certificate, a Nikahname according to Sharia law, and a marriage registration certificate, and so on, based on the marriage system existing in your country of origin or depending on your case where you have married. Fourth, your spouse must have proof of basic knowledge of German language or A1 German language certificate. However, as I mentioned for you before, those who have married before fleeing their country of origin and have got a refugee protection in Germany and they have submitted a preliminary application or an application for family reunification during the first 3 months after getting their refugee protection, it is not a requirement for their spouse to have a A1 or A1 German language certificate. In addition, there are also some other cases based on which A1 or A1 German language certificate is not a requirement for your spouse. For example, in case your spouse is permanently not able to learn a foreign language due to a physical or mental disease or disability, and so on. Fifth, there must be sufficient accommodation available for you and your spouse. Although the required size for the accommodation, which is sufficient for each person, differs a little bit from state to state in Germany, but in general, if you have 12 square meters for each adult and 10 square meters for each child of under 6 years of age, that should be enough. However, as I mentioned for you before, those who have married before fleeing their country of origin and have got a refugee protection in Germany and who have submitted a preliminary application or an application for family reunification during the first 3 months after getting their refugee protection, it is not a requirement for them to have an apartment in Germany which is big enough for him or her and his or her spouse. And sixth, your living expenses and the living expenses of your spouse must be insured, and you must not get any help from job center and from social welfare office or Sozialamt. However, as I mentioned for you before, those who have married before fleeing their country of origin and have got a refugee protection in Germany and who have submitted a preliminary application or an application for family reunification during the first 3 months after getting their refugee protection, it is not a requirement for them that the living expenses of them and their spouse are insured by themselves. In addition, in some other exceptional cases, it is also possible to bring your spouse through a family reunification, although your living expenses and the living expenses of your spouse are not insured by yourself. For example, if you have a serious illness or a disability based on which you are not able to insure your living expenses and the living expenses of your spouse in Germany, you can bring your spouse through a family reunification with the help of a good lawyer without completing this requirement. There are also some other exceptions which depend on the type of the residence permit you have in Germany. The minor children who have not reached the age of 18 and who have got a refugee protection in Germany and whose parents are not living in Germany to take care of them can bring their parents to Germany through a family reunification. For these children, being able to insure their living expenses and the living expenses of their parents or the size of their apartment are not requirements for a family reunification. However, these children should try to apply for a family reunification in order to bring their parents as soon as possible. And their parents must have got the national visa of Germany and must have already come to Germany before these children reach the age of 18. It is worth mentioning that those adults who have married after fleeing their country of origin do not need to submit a preliminary application or a fristwarende Anzeige in their respective foreigners office or in the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. The checklist of the documents the German embassies or general consulates expect from your spouse and your children, the forms which should be filled in, and the information about the amount of visa fee are usually available in the website of the same embassy or general consulate where your spouse and your children are registered for an appointment. So, it is recommendable that after the registration for an appointment in the website of the German embassy or general consulate, this checklist and the forms are downloaded and prepared for the appointments in the German embassy or the German consulate. Thanks a lot for watching my video. If you would like to get similar important information about the immigration laws in Germany, your rights and duties in German society, the living conditions in Germany, and other such important topics, please subscribe and follow our channel. If you have any questions or remarks about today's topic, you can write it under this video and I will be more than happy to answer it for you.